Claude Lorrain remains, for many, the voice of light in 17th century painting. Born Claude Gelée in the Duchy of Lorraine and long known simply as Claude, he reimagined the landscape as a stage where light and air tell the story. His harbors, his pastoral valleys, and his classical vistas feel at once documented and idealized, precise in detail, however dreamlike in mood. Look closer and you'll see a small boat, a distant ruin, a procession of figures, tiny human notes against an architectural or natural symphony. Claude framed the world so that dawns and dusks became actors. He kept a personal record, the Liber Veritatis, to capture each finished idea, a kind of inventory and manifesto that would influence generations of artists. In the paintings that follow, seaports that hum with commerce, Arcadian mills, mythic altars bathed in honeyed light, you'll begin to understand why romantic painters and collectors of the 18th and 19th centuries revered him as a master of atmosphere. This is the art of measured elegance, where composition, classical memory, and a near-scientific study of light combine to produce landscapes that still stop us in our tracks. Before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps us keep creating more educational videos like this one. Claude's story begins far from Rome's marble. He was born Claude Gelée in the borderlands of Lorraine, probably around 1600, and arrived in Rome as a young man. There he trained not as a grand history painter, but by studying nature, ruins, and the light that draped them. Early works show him experimenting with pastoral scenes and watermills, intimate studies of rural life given a classical hush. He signed some pieces as an artisan, might sign a carefully calibrated observation. Small figures, pastoral animals, a mill wheel turning in the foreground, while monuments or distant towns define the horizon. Rome offered him archaeological fragments, papal gardens, and the seascapes of the Mediterranean. Cardinals, magistrates, and later wealthy collectors commissioned scenes that combined biblical or mythological narratives with a calm, composed landscape. Claude rarely painted the human drama up close. He set it within a broader, architectonic environment, letting light and scale determine the emotional weight of the story. Portraits and engravings made after him show the artist later recognized as a gentleman of taste and discipline, a careful chronicler of skies and horizons. One of Claude's most revealing innovations wasn't a painting at all, but a book. The Liber Veritatis, literally the Book of Truth, is his ledger of finished compositions, drawings of completed paintings, notes on patrons, and sometimes a title. It served a practical purpose, to record and to deter copies, but it also offers an intimate roadmap through his creative mind. The Liber contains 80 or more small drawings that show how Claude worked out perspective, how he framed a distant temple or a river bend, and above all, how he orchestrated light. Later in the 18th century, Richard Earlham and John Boydell reproduced those drawings as mezzotints, turning Claude's private record into a public touchstone. The Liber Veritatis therefore functioned as archive, catalog, and model. It allowed him to revisit motifs, a classical ruin, a bridge, a jetty, and to vary them like musical phrases. For students of art, it's invaluable. Here are his compositional skeletons, his quick washes, and the proof that even his most serene vistas began as careful, rational design. When people speak of Claude, they almost always speak of light. He treated daylight as a sculptural tool. Shafts and planes of sunlight carve volumes from air. His horizons are not mere backgrounds, but the central drama, a sun dropping behind ruins, a pale haze softening distant hills, a river reflecting a last flare of gold. Compositionally, he favored a low vantage point and a deep recession into space, a foreground of ordinary life, a middle ground of architecture and figures, and a far distance illumined by the sky. The human figures are often described as staffage, tiny actors whose purpose is to animate the landscape, not to dominate it. Look at Claude's mythological tableau, and you'll notice the same architecture: columns, temples, porticos, positioned to catch and reflect light. In religious works, light often becomes a moral agent, guiding, revealing, occasionally sanctifying the small group of figures within an immense, harmonious world. His approach to sunset and dawn anticipated the 19th century fascination with atmospheric color, and it gave later giants like Turner a vocabulary for painting light as emotion. Claude's oeuvre falls naturally into a few recurring types: the seaport or harbor view, the pastoral or Arcadian landscape, and the classical or mythological composition. His seaports, the great theatrical openings where sea and architecture meet, are perhaps his most celebrated achievement. In works like the embarkation scenes, ships and piers recede under monumental arches while the light pools across the water, choreographing both movement and stillness. These are not topographical records, but idealized ports inhabited by history and commerce. His pastoral landscapes, mills, fords, shepherds, and cattle, often feel like poems about tranquil labor, anchored by a human touch yet dominated by environment. The mill and the ford are superb examples. A wheel or a shallow crossing becomes a focal motif, and the water's sheen is painted with exacting subtlety. Religious and mythological paintings, Tobias and the Angel, Apollo and the Muses, fold narrative into the broader geometry of the landscape, placing sacred action inside an expansive, civilized nature. Across all these themes, Claude returns to a handful of devices: framing ruins, using columns as vertical anchors, scattering small boats and figures to suggest scale, and always controlling the sky. He was as meticulous about the placement of a cloud as about the pose of a single shepherd. The result is a body of work that reads like a controlled poetry of light and classical memory. Claude's influence rippled through centuries. In the 18th and 19th centuries, collectors and painters from England to France revered him as a teacher of ideal landscape. His Liber Veritatis circulated through engraved reproductions, and students learned from his compositional templates: a strong foreground, a structured middle ground, a luminous distance. Romantic painters admired his ability to transmute atmosphere into feeling. J.M.W. Turner, who studied Claude's work obsessively, famously attempted to capture the same glow of light over sea and ruin with a more turbulent temperament. Beyond painters, architects, and garden designers borrowed his sense of staged vistas: a framed view, a distant ruin, a borrowed horizon. Even today, photographers and cinematographers echo Claude's taste for panoramic compositions that balance human scale against monumental space. Curiously, while he rarely foregrounded human drama, the quiet human gestures in his pictures, a wave, an embrace, a departure, often feel more resonant precisely because they are enveloped by such grand, patient light. His legacy is thus not merely visual technique, but a way of composing feeling within space. What makes Claude Lorrain endure is not a single famous painting, but a method. He taught us to listen to light. His compositions are lessons in restraint, the world ordered so that sky, architecture, and water converse. We return to his seaports to find a calm choreography of vessels and arches. We return to his mills and fords to study the gentle geometry of everyday labor. We return to the Liber Veritatis to trace the architecture of invention itself. He is both observer and arranger, naturalist and classicist, and that double life made him a bridge between the old world of classical narrative and a new sensibility that valued mood and atmosphere. If you stand long enough with any one of his canvases, that small human scene, a departure, a meeting, a prayer, will begin to breathe in the light. And you'll understand why artists and collectors across centuries called him a master of the ideal landscape.